Whatever your hand finds to do is a remarkably restrained phrase, and that restraint is the point. It does not command expansion, ambition, or upward movement. It does not instruct the reader to seek new opportunities, larger platforms, or greater influence. It assumes that the work already exists, that the task is already present, that life has already placed something within reach. The verse begins not with aspiration but with attention. It points the reader back to what is immediately before them, not what could be pursued if circumstances were different. In Ecclesiastes, this language matters. The book consistently resists illusion about control, permanence, and progress. It reminds the reader that life unfolds largely outside human mastery. Within that framework, whatever your hand finds to do suggests contingency rather than conquest. The hand does not grasp at what is distant. It finds what is near. It encounters what is already given. This framing removes the pressure to manufacture purpose and instead emphasizes recognition of responsibility. The task is not self-generated, it is discovered. This distinction separates the verse from modern interpretations that treat it as a call to relentless productivity. The text does not encourage chasing work, it encourages honoring work. It does not glorify ambition. It dignifies presence. In wisdom literature, ambition often appears as a source of instability rather than fulfillment. Ecclesiastes repeatedly shows that striving after more leads to restlessness, comparison, and dissatisfaction. Against that backdrop, the verse narrows the focus. It pulls attention away from endless pursuit and places it squarely on the work already entrusted. There is also an implied humility in the phrase. The verse does not say whatever you choose to do or whatever you want to accomplish. It speaks of what the hand finds, not what the ego designs. This language recognizes that much of life's work is assigned rather than selected. Family responsibilities, vocational duties, acts of care, moments of service, these often arrive without ceremony. They do not always feel aligned with personal dreams or long-term plans, yet the verse treats them as worthy of full engagement, not because they advance status, but because they are real. This perspective pushes against a cultural narrative that measures work primarily by visibility and payoff. In the world's logic, work is valuable if it leads somewhere else. It must scale, impress, or open doors. Ecclesiastes refuses that logic. It treats the present task as meaningful in itself, not as a stepping stone. The instruction is not to optimize the outcome, but to honor the moment. What matters is not how far the work can go, but how faithfully it is held. The phrase also protects against distraction. To do something with your might assumes focus. It assumes that the mind is not split between what is happening now and what might happen later. Distraction, in this sense, is not merely a modern problem, but a human one. Ecclesiastes repeatedly laments how easily people lose themselves chasing future gain, only to miss the substance of the present. By narrowing attention to what the hand finds, the verse invites a kind of groundedness that resists fragmentation. This groundedness is not passive, it is intentional. Doing something with one's might does not imply overexertion, but it does imply sincerity. Half-heartedness is subtly critiqued throughout Ecclesiastes as another form of vanity. To be physically present while mentally elsewhere is a kind of absence. The verse calls the reader back into full participation, not in everything, but in something specific and real. It encourages depth rather than breadth. Importantly, the verse does not attach success metrics to the work. There is no promise of reward, recognition, or legacy. The motivation offered is not external validation but internal coherence. The work is worth doing well because it is yours to do, not because it will be remembered. This reflects a broader theme in Ecclesiastes. Meaning is found in faithful engagement, not lasting impact. Many of the book's reflections dismantle the idea that permanence equals significance. In that light, wholehearted engagement becomes an act of wisdom rather than a strategy for advancement. The realism of the verse also keeps it from becoming moralistic. It does not shame the reader for limitations. It acknowledges that work is bounded by time, energy, and circumstance. The call is not to do everything, but to do something fully. This protects against both despair and overreach. One does not need to control the future to live wisely in the present. One only needs to be attentive to what is already in hand. In this way, the verse functions as a corrective to both laziness and obsession. It rejects disengagement without endorsing compulsion. It affirms effort without idolizing work. The balance is subtle, but deliberate. Ecclesiastes consistently warns against extremes, showing how both neglect and overinvestment distort the soul. Whatever your hand finds to do sits squarely in the middle, calling for faithfulness without frenzy. This emphasis also reframes excellence. Excellence here is not about outperforming others or exceeding expectations. It is about integrity between the person and the task. To do something with one's might is to bring one's full self into alignment with one's present responsibility. It is an inward quality before it is an outward achievement. The verse does not measure excellence by comparison, but by coherence. Seen this way, the instruction becomes quietly radical. It liberates work from the burden of self-justification. One does not need to prove worth through productivity. One does not need to turn every task into a ladder. The work already given is sufficient as a place of faithful engagement. This frees the individual from both envy and anxiety, anchoring them instead in attentiveness. Within the broader theology of Ecclesiastes, this attentiveness becomes a form of resistance. It resists the illusion that meaning can be stockpiled. It resists the pressure to constantly reposition oneself for a better future. It resists the temptation to treat life as a series of transactions rather than a lived experience. To do what is in hand with one's might is to refuse to be absent from one's own life, to refuse to defer presence in the hope that something later will finally justify the now. Do it with your might is often misunderstood because modern ears hear it through the lens of performance culture. It is easy to assume the verse is calling for intensity, overexertion, or constant output, as though Scripture were endorsing exhaustion as a virtue. But within Ecclesiastes, the phrase carries a different weight. It is not a command to overwork, nor is it a demand for constant productivity. It is a call to integrity. It speaks to the manner in which something is done, not the magnitude of what is achieved. In the wisdom tradition, excellence is never defined by scale or recognition. It is defined by congruence, by the alignment between intention, effort, and action. To do something with one's might means to be undivided in the doing. It assumes presence, sincerity, and wholeness. The verse is less concerned with how much is accomplished and more concerned with whether the person is internally aligned with the task before them. Half-heartedness, not limitation, is what the text quietly resists. Ecclesiastes consistently exposes the emptiness of chasing outcomes. Again and again, it names the frustration of labor pursued for gain, applause, or legacy. In that context, do it with your might cannot mean striving for results, because the book repeatedly reminds the reader that results are unstable and often meaningless. What remains within human reach is not control over outcomes, but faithfulness in effort. Integrity becomes the only sustainable measure of excellence when everything else proves unreliable. This reframing removes comparison from the equation. Excellence in this sense is not relative. It is not determined by how others perform or how the work is received. It is inward rather than competitive. A task done with integrity carries weight regardless of its visibility. Whether the work is noticed or ignored, rewarded or dismissed, its value lies in the coherence between the worker and the work. That coherence is what Ecclesiastes elevates, not achievement. Doing something with one's might also assumes honesty about limits. Integrity does not require doing more than one is capable of. It requires doing what one is capable of honestly. There is no call here to exceed human boundaries. In fact, Ecclesiastes is keenly aware of human finitude. It repeatedly names weariness, frustration, and the limits of wisdom itself. Against that backdrop, the verse does not push the reader beyond their capacity. It invites them to inhabit their capacity fully, without pretense or self-deception. This guards against performative effort. Performative effort expends energy to be seen. Integrity expends energy to be true. The difference is subtle but profound. Performative effort is always looking outward for validation. Integrity is anchored inward, grounded in consistency between belief and action. To do something with one's might, then, is not to impress, but to be faithful, not to exhaust oneself, but to be whole in the moment. There is also a moral clarity embedded in the phrase. When effort is divided, when a person's body is engaged, but their heart is elsewhere, work becomes distorted. It turns mechanical or resentful. Ecclesiastes treats such fragmentation as another form of vanity, a life lived at a distance from itself. Integrity restores unity. It draws the whole person into the act, even when the act itself is ordinary or unremarkable. This understanding also protects the verse from being weaponized, when "do it with your might" is interpreted as a demand for constant intensity. It becomes a tool for exploitation by others or by oneself. But Ecclesiastes offers no such endorsement. The book is too honest about fatigue and futility to promote endless exertion. Instead, it recognizes that meaning is fragile and easily eroded when work becomes detached from purpose. Integrity preserves meaning precisely because it does not depend on outcome. The phrase also resists procrastination, though not through guilt. Procrastination often arises not from laziness but from misalignment when the work feels disconnected from the self. By calling for wholeheartedness, the verse addresses that disconnection. It does not shame delay. It invites engagement. It suggests that something done fully, even briefly, carries more weight than something endlessly postponed in search of better conditions. Within this framework, excellence becomes an act of stewardship rather than self-expression. The work is not a platform for ego, nor is it a means of self-definition. It is something entrusted, something encountered, something to be handled with care. Doing it with one's might is an act of respect for the task, for oneself, and for the reality that time is limited. The effort honors the moment without demanding that the moment justify itself. This kind of excellence is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not accumulate accolades, but it cultivates a life that is internally consistent, where actions reflect values and effort reflects intention. Ecclesiastes consistently suggests that such consistency is rare and therefore precious. In a world marked by illusion and striving, integrity becomes a form of wisdom. By separating excellence from outcome, the verse also loosens the grip of fear. When success is no longer the measure, failure loses its power to define. One can engage fully without needing to guarantee results. This freedom allows effort to be honest rather than anxious. The work can be done with care instead of desperation, with attention instead of self-protection. In this way, do it with your might becomes less about intensity and more about presence. It asks whether the person is actually there in the work, whether they are bringing their attention, their sincerity, and their best available energy into what is already before them. It refuses the idea that excellence must always look impressive. Sometimes excellence looks like faithfulness, in obscurity, consistency without applause, effort without assurance. Within the broader logic of Ecclesiastes, this makes sense. If life is fleeting, if outcomes are uncertain, if legacy is unreliable, then integrity becomes the only stable ground. To do what is in hand with one's might is to live without splitting oneself between now and later, between duty and desire. It is to act in a way that does not require future justification, because the value is already present in the act itself, held in the coherence between the person and the work they are doing. The reference to mortality in Ecclesiastes 9:10 is not meant to frighten the reader, but to ground them. The verse situates human effort within the reality of finitude, reminding the listener that time is not endless and opportunity is not guaranteed. In Ecclesiastes, death is not treated as a dramatic interruption, but as an ever-present horizon that gives shape to life. The mention of Sheol is not a threat meant to motivate panic-driven productivity. It is a sober acknowledgement that human activity is bounded. Wisdom, in this sense, begins with seeing clearly rather than living as though time were infinite. Throughout Ecclesiastes, mortality functions as a corrective to illusion. Human beings tend to live as if there will always be more time later, more chances to act, to love, to engage, to make meaning. This assumption fuels distraction and postponement. By naming the reality that work, thought, and planning do not extend indefinitely, the verse brings attention back to the present moment. It strips away the fantasy that meaning can always be deferred. What is not lived now cannot simply be stockpiled for later. This realism does not diminish life, it sharpens it. When life is understood as limited, presence becomes more valuable, attention becomes more precious. Ecclesiastes repeatedly suggests that meaning is not found in permanence but in participation. The awareness that life moves toward an end invites a different posture toward daily activity, not urgency fueled by fear, but clarity shaped by truth. Mortality becomes the lens through which priorities are clarified, not the engine of anxiety. In this context, the call to do what is in hand with one's might is less about speed and more about completeness. Because life is finite, half-engagement becomes a form of waste. Not waste in the sense of inefficiency, but waste of presence. To live distracted, fragmented, or perpetually deferred is to let life pass without being fully inhabited. Ecclesiastes does not condemn pleasure, work, or enjoyment. It questions whether people are actually present for them. The acknowledgement of death also dismantles the illusion of ultimate control. Much of human striving is an attempt to secure the future, to guarantee outcomes, to insulate oneself from uncertainty. Ecclesiastes repeatedly exposes the fragility of such efforts. Plans unravel, circumstances change. The wise and the foolish alike face the same end. In light of this, the verse does not instruct the reader to dominate life, but to engage it honestly while it is available. This honesty tempers both arrogance and despair. Arrogance dissolves because no amount of effort can extend life indefinitely. Despair is softened because meaning is no longer tied to permanence. The verse assumes that human work matters even though it does not last forever. This tension is central to Ecclesiastes. Life is fleeting, yet it is still to be lived fully. Mortality does not negate meaning. It relocates it from permanence to presence. By situating effort within the boundary of death, the verse also challenges procrastination rooted in denial. Many delays are not caused by laziness, but by the unspoken belief that there will always be another opportunity. Ecclesiastes disrupts that belief without dramatizing it. It simply states reality. Time moves forward. Opportunities pass. Life does not pause until one feels ready. In this way, the verse gently urges engagement now, not because tomorrow is terrifying, but because today is real. The reference to Sheol also underscores the uniqueness of embodied life. Ecclesiastes portrays life as the realm where action, thought, creativity, and engagement occur. Whatever one makes of the afterlife, the text is clear that this present existence is distinct. It is here that choices are made, relationships are lived, and work is done. This uniqueness confers weight on ordinary moments. The present is not merely a prelude, it is a meaningful arena in itself. This understanding counters the tendency to treat life as a rehearsal. When people imagine that real meaning lies elsewhere, either in a distant future or in some idealized state, they risk disengaging from the actual moment. Ecclesiastes resists that disengagement. By naming the limits of time, it insists that life is not something to be postponed. The verse does not urge frantic activity, it urges attentiveness. It calls the reader to inhabit the moment fully because it will not repeat itself. Mortality also reframes success. If life is brief, then accumulation loses its ultimate power. Ecclesiastes repeatedly points out that wealth, achievement, and legacy cannot be carried forward indefinitely. This does not render them meaningless, but it does relativize them. The verse subtly redirects attention away from what can be preserved and toward what can be lived. The question shifts from "what will last" to "what am I doing with the time that is given?" This shift has ethical implications. When time is finite, how one treats others matters more. How one shows up in responsibilities matters more. Half-heartedness becomes not just a personal shortcoming, but a missed opportunity for faithfulness. The verse suggests that wisdom is not found in maximizing output, but in honoring the present with sincerity. The work in hand becomes a place where mortality and meaning meet. Rather than encouraging fear, the verse cultivates sobriety. Sobriety, in biblical wisdom, is the ability to see clearly without illusion. It is the opposite of denial. Ecclesiastes repeatedly invites the reader into this clarity, even when it is uncomfortable. By acknowledging death, the verse removes the false comfort of endless delay and replaces it with the dignity of presence. Life is not infinite, but it is real. It is happening now. In this light, the call to engage fully is an act of respect for life itself. It honors the fact that each moment is unrepeatable. It resists the temptation to live elsewhere, either in regret over the past or anxiety about the future. Mortality anchors attention in the present, not as a demand, but as an actually to-s invitation. The verse does not rush the reader, it steadies them. It reminds them that the time they are in is the time they have, that the work before them is the work available, that engagement now is more honest than anticipation later, that presence carries a weight that postponement never will, that life, precisely because it is limited, calls not for panic, but for attentiveness, not for frantic accumulation, but for faithful engagement, not for endless planning, but for inhabiting what is already here, held within the quiet truth that time moves forward, whether one is present or not. Ecclesiastes 9:10 places work within a carefully limited frame. It affirms work as meaningful without allowing it to become ultimate. This distinction is essential to the wisdom of the text. Work is treated as real, valuable, and worthy of full engagement, but never as the source of identity, salvation, or lasting security. The verse resists two extremes at once: the devaluation of work as meaningless, and the elevation of work as all-defining. Meaning is affirmed, but ultimacy is denied. Throughout Ecclesiastes, work is described honestly. It is necessary. It occupies much of human life. It can be satisfying at times and frustrating at others. It can bring provision, but it can also bring anxiety. The writer never romanticizes labor, yet he never dismisses it. Work matters because it is part of lived reality, not because it grants transcendence. This realism protects the reader from turning effort into an idol while still honoring the dignity of engagement. When the verse instructs the reader to do the work in hand with their might, it does so without attaching the work to eternal guarantees. There is no promise that the work will last, be remembered, or produce a legacy. Ecclesiastes repeatedly undermines those expectations elsewhere, reminding the reader that what is built can be lost, forgotten, or overtaken by others. In that context, the call to work wholeheartedly cannot be about securing permanence. It must be about something closer, more immediate, and more grounded. This grounding reframes motivation. If work is not ultimate, then it does not need to justify existence. A person does not work in order to prove worth, secure identity, or outrun mortality. Work becomes a space of faithfulness rather than a source of meaning itself. The task matters because it is present, not because it guarantees something beyond itself. This frees the worker from the crushing burden of needing work to answer questions it was never meant to answer. Ecclesiastes is especially resistant to the idea that work can save. The book repeatedly exposes the futility of placing ultimate hope in effort, achievement, or accumulation. It shows how easily work becomes toil when it is expected to provide what it cannot. By affirming work as meaningful but not ultimate, the verse offers a corrective. It allows work to remain good without demanding that it be godlike. This distinction also softens disappointment. When work is treated as ultimate, failure becomes devastating and success becomes addictive. Identity rises and falls with productivity. But when work is meaningful without being ultimate, disappointment no longer has the final word. One can invest fully without being destroyed by loss or unmet expectations. The effort still matters, but it does not define the whole self. The verse also implicitly critiques the idea of work as self-creation. Modern narratives often treat work as the primary means by which a person becomes someone. Ecclesiastes resists this logic. Identity, in the wisdom tradition, is not manufactured through labor. Work expresses who someone is, but it does not create who they are. By keeping work in its proper place, the verse prevents the collapse of identity into productivity. This perspective also preserves rest. If work is not ultimate, then rest is not failure. Ecclesiastes repeatedly acknowledges cycles: work and rest, effort and enjoyment, labor and release. By refusing to absolutize work, the text makes space for rest without guilt. One can step away from work without losing worth, because worth was never grounded there in the first place. At the same time, the verse avoids trivializing work. Meaningfulness is not removed simply because work is temporary. The fact that something does not last forever does not make it insignificant. Ecclesiastes consistently holds this tension. Transience does not equal meaninglessness. Work can be meaningful precisely because it occurs within time, because it participates in the texture of lived experience. The verse dignifies ordinary labor without inflating it beyond its proper bounds. This balance also shapes how success is viewed. Success is not defined by endurance, expansion, or recognition. It is defined by faithfulness within limits. A task done with care, attention, and integrity is successful regardless of whether it leads to promotion, visibility, or legacy. The verse quietly redefines what counts, shifting the measure from outcome to engagement. By refusing to make work ultimate, Ecclesiastes also protects relationships. When work becomes the primary source of meaning, people often become secondary. The book repeatedly highlights the loneliness and dissatisfaction that follow when labor eclipses companionship, joy, and presence. By keeping work in its place, the verse allows space for other goods, community, enjoyment, reflection to coexist without competition. The wisdom here is not anti-work, it is anti-absolutizing. It recognizes that human life contains many goods, none of which are meant to bear the full weight of meaning alone. Work is one of those goods. It deserves attention, care, and effort, but not worship. When work is asked to carry ultimate significance, it collapses under the weight. When it is allowed to be meaningful but limited, it becomes sustainable. This sustainability matters deeply in Ecclesiastes, a book attuned to fatigue and frustration. The writer knows what it is to labor endlessly and still feel empty. The verse does not deny that experience. It responds to it by recalibrating expectations. Work is reclaimed from futility not by promising that it will last forever, but by freeing it from the demand to do so. In this way, Ecclesiastes 9:10 offers a posture rather than a program. It does not outline a theology of career or achievement. It offers a way of inhabiting work honestly. The task in hand is neither dismissed nor idolized. It is received as part of the human condition, worthy of care, effort, and sincerity, yet unable to carry ultimate meaning. This posture allows a person to engage fully without clinging, to labor faithfully without despair, to take work seriously without taking it as the final measure of life, to hold effort with open hands rather than clenched ones, to recognize that work participates in meaning without exhausting it, to live with the quiet freedom that comes from knowing that what one does matters, but not more than what one is, and not more than the life in which that work takes place. Ecclesiastes 9:10 must be read through the lens of wisdom literature, because wisdom literature speaks differently than commands, laws, or prophetic warnings. It does not issue orders meant to be obeyed mechanically. It offers observations meant to be inhabited. Its goal is not compliance, but discernment. When Ecclesiastes says, "Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might," it is not issuing a productivity mandate. It is offering a wise posture for living within a fragile, unpredictable world. Wisdom literature assumes complexity. It does not promise clear formulas or guaranteed outcomes. Ecclesiastes in particular resists tidy explanations. It names contradictions without resolving them, tensions without smoothing them over. It acknowledges that the righteous may suffer, the foolish may prosper, and effort does not always correlate with reward. Within this worldview, instructions cannot function like rules that guarantee success. They function as guidance for living attentively amid uncertainty. Because of this, Ecclesiastes 9:10 cannot be treated like a command to maximize output or efficiency. Wisdom does not equate fullness of life with fullness of schedule. Instead, it values presence, attentiveness, and honesty. The verse addresses not how much one does, but how one inhabits what is already before them. It is less concerned with accomplishment than with engagement. Wisdom literature often pushes back against distraction, though not in the modern technological sense alone. Distraction in Ecclesiastes is existential. It is the habit of living elsewhere, either in regret about the past or anxiety about the future, while neglecting the present moment. Much of the book critiques this tendency indirectly, showing how chasing what is not yet here leads to dissatisfaction with what already is. Ecclesiastes 9:10 responds to this by narrowing focus. It draws attention away from speculation and toward immediacy. The phrase, "whatever your hand finds," suggests contingency rather than planning dominance. It acknowledges that life does not always unfold according to intention. Tasks arise unexpectedly. Responsibilities are often inherited rather than chosen. Wisdom literature does not demand that life be optimized. It asks that life be noticed. The verse invites attentiveness to the concrete realities of one situation instead of fixation on imagined alternatives. This attentiveness stands in contrast to a mindset that constantly evaluates whether something else would be more meaningful. Wisdom recognizes that meaning is not found by endlessly reassessing one's position, but by being present within it. Ecclesiastes consistently warns against the restlessness that comes from comparison and speculation. The verse gently interrupts that restlessness by calling the reader back to what is already within reach. Importantly, wisdom literature is not interested in extremes. It avoids both negligence and obsession. Ecclesiastes critiques laziness in some places, but it also critiques overinvestment in work, pleasure, and achievement. Its wisdom lies in balance. Ecclesiastes 9:10 reflects this balance by affirming effort without endorsing excess. It does not ask the reader to do everything. It asks them to do something fully. This approach reframes diligence. Diligence here is not about relentless activity. It is about care. It is about refusing to treat the present lightly. Wisdom understands that inattentiveness erodes meaning just as surely as despair does. To approach life distractedly is to miss it. Ecclesiastes 9-10 speaks against that loss, urging the reader to engage the moment sincerely rather than drift through it half-aware. Because wisdom literature is observational, it is deeply human. Ecclesiastes does not speak from an idealized vantage point. It speaks from experience of effort, disappointment, joy, and futility. When it calls for wholehearted engagement, it does so with full awareness that outcomes are unpredictable. This is what makes the instruction wise rather than naive. It does not assume that effort will be rewarded. It assumes that effort, rightly placed, has value regardless of reward. This perspective also explains why the verse does not attach moral judgment to success or failure. Wisdom literature resists moralizing outcomes. It understands that circumstances often exceed control. Ecclesiastes 9:10 does not say that wholehearted effort will lead to prosperity or recognition. It simply affirms that such effort is the wisest way to inhabit the time one has. Wisdom literature values the present because it is the only place where life actually occurs. Past and future are acknowledged, but they are not where action happens. Ecclesiastes repeatedly brings the reader back to what is now eating, drinking, working, enjoying, noticing. These ordinary acts become sites of wisdom when they are approached with attentiveness rather than haste. The verse fits squarely within this pattern, elevating presence over projection. This emphasis on presence is quietly countercultural. Many systems, economic, social, even religious, encourage people to live for later. Later success, later rest, later meaning. Wisdom literature questions this deferral. It does not deny the future, but it refuses to let the future eclipse the present. Ecclesiastes 9:10 embodies this refusal by grounding effort in what is immediately available. The verse also reflects the humility that characterizes wisdom. It does not assume mastery over life. It does not promise control. It simply invites faithful engagement within limitation. Wisdom, in this sense, is not about knowing how to win at life. It is about knowing how to live honestly within it. The instruction to do what is in hand with one's might reflects acceptance of finitude rather than denial of it. By reading Ecclesiastes 9:10 as wisdom rather than command, the verse becomes an invitation rather than a burden. It does not weigh the reader down with obligation. It steadies them. It offers a way of being present without demanding certainty. It affirms that the moment matters without claiming that the moment must be maximized. It calls the reader into attentiveness rather than anxiety. Ultimately, the verse teaches that a distracted life is not a wise life. Wisdom does not mean doing everything or knowing everything. It means being fully present where one already is. It means refusing to let life pass unnoticed while chasing illusions of control. Ecclesiastes 9:10 articulates this wisdom quietly, without spectacle, without promise of payoff, offering instead a grounded way to inhabit time, work, and effort with clarity, sincerity, and attention to the moment that is actually unfolding now.